This is Radically Alive Women's Edgecast.
Hallo Marietta Schürholz.
Hallo, liebe Julia.
I'm following this impulse of speaking, capturing your wisdom or your experience, whatever you want to call that, of living a nonlinear life. You have invited me to visit a museum that you've created about your life, which is such a bold move in itself.
Yes, my museum.
And in this museum, I could witness and follow your path, which has been, it's like marked with bold moves that are really out of the ordinary, and also I get this imprint of a strong creative force coming through you. And I would love to hear from you. What is your path?
I think there's this nice saying by Kierkegaard, you have to live your life forward and you can understand it backward. If I look backward, I would say the inner or the secret level is healing. It's healing a wound. Not that I was conscious of it, but I felt like I was born into a situation where there was so much trauma from losing parents in an early age and losing in Second World War before and after, that I would say subconsciously there is something in me that tried to cope with so much that was missing. And my experience was that there were some structures given in like school and grades and a career to follow that I was first I chose the known, but I came to a point where I realized when I was exactly 33 that I'm not getting anywhere. The grades could be great, but I didn't feel any ground in myself.
What were the grades that you did? What was the conventional path that you went?
The conventional path was trying to be famous. No, at least trying to be seen for who I am, what I achieve. So first I wanted to become an actress, then a theater director, then I studied literature and art history. Then I found my path through writing, and art history was a very good way to do that because I could write over things without saying too much about myself. I could hide in knowledge, and art was still like a channel to something spiritual. And the source of art is revelation, and I was always seeking for a revelation. And I was happy enough to meet a couple of great men who could give revelation while looking at pieces of art. So it was a mixed journey between being fed, the soul being fed to maybe 30%, but 70% still was as if I would take up a role, dress myself up and play, but not in the nice sense play, but pretend. And I was getting more and more aware of that part that was just always observing me and giving comments to the pretender. And even though I think these talks which I gave when running a contemporary art gallery were the best I could do, there was still this coming home at night after a big opening. I was feeling exhausted and not really nurtured, because the part that wanted to have recognition didn't admit to this to itself. So I was kind of lying lying to myself what I really need. And I was trying to get it where I couldn't find it. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, and I also want to mention that you did a PhD in art history.
Yes,
right?
I did.
You really
I
did the whole thing.
I
of
did the whole
scientific
thing, and I did
career.
it super seriously. I could have followed the idea of being a promising art curator, and at the same time I couldn't. I couldn't because I was searching for something that wasn't available in the market.
And what was that something? How
That
would you describe
something
that?
was healing the wound. Healing the female wound. And I don't mean that in the gender sense. I mean that in the approach to life. My father was a doctor. He was even a gynecologist. So his attention was towards female wounding on the outside or giving birth. But I sense that I still grew up in a very scientific, materialistic world where I was trained to be analytical, control things by mental observation and navigation. And what I was searching was to be included, to be fully included with all my feeling and motion, spontaneity, craziness, fantasy, poetry, the yearning for the vastness of God, which I couldn't name, but I was just knowing that there was something else where it goes through. It goes through, it goes this way through, and it goes this way up. It just includes the skin and the hair and the womb and the vagina. It just includes the navel. It includes. And that I am consistent of all these bodies and not being reduced as I reduced myself, trying to get recognition, meaning to belong, meaning to be loved. And the moment I realized how empty my endeavor was, there was something in me that stopped. I remember this was my 33rd birthday, and I just knew I'm not going to do it the way I used to celebrate my birthday. I'm going to go into a monastery. I'm gonna check out meditation. And I came to this Buddhist Zen nun who was super strict, and from even my strict box, it was too much strictness. So it took a couple of years until I met somebody else, which, as I said, gave me distinction so I could navigate from within. And I just want to quote this poem by Mary Oliver, which I think is really well known because it's so simple. It's called Wild Geese. And the first 5 lines go like this. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. I think I read this on my journeys through India, and I think these 5 lines, they make a whole biography, at least mine. Trying to be good, first thing. Walk on my knees, meaning trying to heal some kind of guilt that is not even mine, but being conditioned in a let's say Christian culture that repenting is the way. And then this turning towards, how does she say, the soft animal of my body that loves what it loves. that is, for me, is like in this famous myth of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, not goddess, queen, emperor, who has everything. She's beautiful, she's intelligent, but there's one, she's a great husband, but there's one thing she does not have. It's access and connection to her sister. And her sister, Ereshkigal, she lives in the underworld. And she lives there for good reason, because she's been hurt. And she does not allow anybody to approach her. So the only way that Inanna, one day realizing that there is something missing in her life, tries to find her is by going through different portals, and at every portal she has to give up one of her powers. May it be beauty, next may it be wisdom, may it be creativity, and she goes through these portals getting more and more naked, more and more defenseless, more and more vulnerable. And only then, through some assistance from the animal world, she can receive what her sister is feeling. I feel a little bit like when I left this path of being good, it was so much resistance in myself, because these habitual ways of being intelligent and eloquent, they are just strong survival patterns. They did a beautiful job, but like from a different planet when I want to go to the sweet animal of my body. It's like descending. I don't know, whoever said that the biggest way you can walk in your life is going from here to here, maybe to here. So I met this Buddhist nun who was giving me the distinctions of the profoundness of Buddhist philosophy and spirituality. I changed my path. I gave up being a curator, and I went on a 1.5-year pilgrimage to Australia and to Thailand and to Nepal and then to India. It was like going backwards from contemporary Buddhism to the foundation of Buddhism. And at the same time, I met Indian culture, which is, in some parts, although it doesn't look like this, it still has a profound appreciation of the female and the spiritual. And to find this connection, even in museums and galleries where people would open an exhibition and would do a prayer, for me this was like, okay, this is possible. It's possible to touch the whole being, not just the Bildungsbürger, whatever that is in English, but to touch the yearning to go back to the source, which I believe everybody has, whatever that source is, but I think it's this experience of wholeness. And therefore it's a holy dimension. So India was very nurturing for me on that level. At the same time, apart from all the atrocities, there's so much beauty in everyday life and so much creativity of people. They just tell the story of God in the way they want to tell it. It's not one way only. And in this not only one way, each one has much more freedom to express and actually worship myself in the face of God. So it was a different approach to life. And since I always was a passionate cook and tried to balance my intellectual work when I wrote my PhD with that what I needed, like doing an apricot tart with lavender or things which I love, smell and touch and taste. And so I thought I open a catering company, but of course not an ordinary catering company, because I had to find always, there was still the sense of I need recognition for being special. So I opened Buddha's Banquet, which was catering spirituality through food.
Love it. Catering spirituality through food.
Yeah. Which, if you look back on the Christian myth of the Last Supper, is exactly what he did. In a way, there was already this, let's call it female part, you know, the Shakti being everywhere in every living being, plus the clarity of the spiritual connection to purity and clarity. So mixing in love, that is food for me. And then doing this for a couple of years, the famous 7, I met a man, because I had never ever really lived a relationship long term, because I was shy and wounded and didn't trust men. There came this man who had more the statue of Hephaestus, which is the Greek god for doing the iron, and he looked so well grounded, and he was working in a proper job, not like me, and I felt security with him. So I not only married him, I also copied or tried to learn what he was doing, and it was quality management in social organizations, which I couldn't even spell when I met him. And I went again through a schooling to understand maybe that even if in these proper organizations there are humans living there which would very much like to feel. And that was the ingredient that I then brought into these places where we're doing consultations or certifications. I had started actually pretty similar than you. We started at the same time approximately with possibility management, and for me that was an important ingredient to acknowledge what is missing in everyday conversation, what is missing in meeting, because the axis goes from here and not from here or from here. So introducing this in places where it's being wanted, but it's not conscious that it's being necessary, was part of my life for another 7 years, until I realized I'm losing my creativity there, and life was changing also with the pandemic. I was much more at home, and again I was like, why? What can I do against social distancing? So I created a small event room, maybe. Event I don't like. It was a bakery together with storytelling. So I dived into storytelling, and especially fairy tales, you know, finding a lot of initiations there, which connected to another strand of my life, which I forgot to mention. It's actually like a red thread through everything. I always wanted to create moments that would connect, and would connect in all dimensions, would connect on the horizontal level, like we do when we sit around the table, but would at the same moment connect to the vertical level. And I was initiated to that in a moment where my mother died, where I was the only one to do anything with this dead body, which was in this refrigerator room. And I was very clearly called by a voice inside, if not you, who else? If not now, when? And I was like, I have to do something to allow this spirit to travel onwards. And the experience that I made in all my helplessness was so unexpectedly empowering that I thought, why are we not initiated to connect to these powers? What are these powers? I think it's when everything synchronizes and you know exactly, you feel it, that you are in this web that is complete divine intelligence. And this divine design just shows up for that brief moment. And to be able to navigate there is only possible if I step out of my trying to be good box. Because that box trying to be good cannot do that. It doesn't even know where to go. But with the death of my mother, there was such a strong necessity that I stepped out. And which reminds me of a poem of Lalla, which I unfortunately cannot quote. But it's this line where she steps in and there was nobody stepping anymore. It's this stepping into something and there's not this small me observing what I'm doing. Of course she goes back, but that was the initiation for me to ritual. And then I followed up on that and I thought, who knows? Who can tell me? Who is a magician? Who has been growing up in this tradition and who has been researching about it? So I met about 10, 12 people and interviewed them, which then went into a small, more meditative movie called Ritual.
And I wouldn't call it small. It's really an amazingly beautiful, strong movie. It's short, half an hour, 40 minutes, and it's not small.
No, it's dense. It's a distillation of aspects. It's opening the whole landscape of what ritual could and might be, why we need it, why it's essential to culture and connection in these different dimensions, and therefore why it's vital to every human, especially when walking over a threshold. And that brings me back to my beginnings. It brings me back to what am I unconsciously taking up when incarnating? And I would say I was unconsciously taking up the wounds of my parents. One being, how does female get recognition for who she is? And the other, how do we come home? How do we truly come home? And what does community and ritual and even food play as a role for this emotional and spiritual homecoming? I think that was like, without my father probably knowing this consciously, but I connect that to him, very much so. And I'm grateful. Now I can say I'm grateful, even though I haven't come to the depth of my belly and womb yet. I feel like, aha, now I've stepped through this portal and giving up that. It's no longer important, like, what do people think of me? how can I earn for what I do, is become... Luckily, I know now I'm a reflector in human design, so that makes it much easier because it's not this burden having to achieve anything. But to then go that way from here to being present with what my body really loves, I think I will take a stand for that.
Thank you for taking. It's like I witness it as a bold stand, and it's a feminine boldness that you demonstrate through your life, through following these pulls. And I've asked you this before, like, how did you do that? You know, for this film, you spoke with Charles Eisenstein and you interviewed him, where you encountered all these famous lamas and people, and how did you do that? And is that accurate?
I think there is this, as I said, there is the imprint, I would call it the small self or the ego, you know, boldness to write somebody, I want to do an interview with you. There is a tiny bit of, maybe then I'll be important. But I was always yearning for the depth of, I don't know if it's dignity or surrender to a true necessity. That I could step back and the necessity would step up. So with this moment where I did the ritual on the graveyard in Cologne for my mother in the middle of crazy life, shouting and crying and praying, I stepped out because there was a necessity. And for me, there was this necessity. I really wanted to discover what is ritual. So it wasn't boldness in that sense where I would have flattered my own ego doing this interview with well-known people. It was this edgy cliff where the two mix, where the drive of my ego is necessary, and where the service to what is coming through me is necessary as well. And they do start cooperating at that edge. So I would have never thought it bold, whatever bold means. What is German for bold? Tapfer? Forsch. Yeah. I think in that moment I just knew, who knows? Because I was connected to the true not knowing. And probably it was the first authentic moment in my life when I wanted to learn something. That I wanted to learn. At least understand it mentally. And I felt I wasn't offered anything profound. I read a lot of books on ritual, but it just did not meet my expectation. And whenever I spoke with these people like Sorbonne Fussumet and Charles Eisenstein, Joanna Macy and David Steidl-Rast, they met my expectation. They, you know, went much beyond. And actually I can watch this film over and over again because I always find a small piece which is exactly like the information I need today. So yes, for me, it's only working when they cooperate. When the timid side maybe becomes bold, but she wants two things. She wants to be seen, and she wants to make something be seen. I think that's a good mix.
I'm getting this distinction between boldness coming maybe more from the ego and the necessity just than the rest. the timidity falls away because there's the necessity in the driver's seat.
Yes, I think that's what I experienced with all these lamas and whoever I met. I was blessed to meet. It's like this thread. If I'm in tune with my navel cord to existence and necessity to be, they open immediately because they're much more in that frequency. But when they see there's somebody, or when they experience or hear, somebody is driving towards that, there is no barrier. And I experienced that so many times when asking people that they are waiting to be asked, to be opened, to be able to deliver. It can only be delivered when there's somebody to receive. And I can only receive if there's a place in me ready to not be the one that entered into the conversation when I exited. I just remember when I did the interview with Clinton, it was Sobonfu. Sobonfu's mother had died. She was the igniting flame. But her mother had died, and she said, no, I have to wait for 1 year until I can step in front of a camera again. So I had my cameraman, I had the cutter, I had the sound person. And I was like, what a waste of energy if I'm not starting a film. So I called Clinton and I said, Clinton, can we do an interview on initiation and ritual? Because I thought what he was doing was modern initiation. And in my terminology, ritual is not fixed by a strong, how do you call it, an agenda, what to do first, second, third. For me, ritual means stepping into the unknown, preparing to step into the unknown, and then anything can happen. But you have to be acute. So he said yes. The night before we had our appointment, he called me at 11 o'clock at night and said, Marietta, no way I'm going to do an interview on ritual. I'm not doing ritual. Ritual's bullshit. And I was like, okay, how do I shift that to somewhere that would be working? I said, and then let's talk about initiation, okay? So, okay, initiation was okay. So I started the interview with him, and after about 5 minutes or so, maybe 7, he said, okay, I'm done. Now you sit here and I do the interview with you. That was very scary. Wow. That was super scary. I don't dare looking at that again. When I would have stumbled there from my head. But when you were just sitting there, I had this notion, what is it that keeps on flowing when you're just a vessel for something? And the interviewer and the interviewed are not separate. No.